Hi, everybody. I'm David Nugent, Artistic Director for HamptonsFilm, and want to thank you for checking out Sound of Metal. We are very excited to be joined by the film's writer and director, Darius Marder.
Hi. Hi,
and
David.
Riz Ahmed.
Hey.
So I'm going to start with you, Darius. I understand it was a very long journey to get this film made. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of the project?
Well, it's actually, David, I was just hanging with my friend Derek Cianfrance yesterday in Brooklyn, and we were talking about how we first talked about this project 13 years ago in 2007. And that was even before, I first met you,
yeah,
which is amazing. And so it really has been a hike. And it's been a hike, but it doesn't feel like a Sisyphusian hike. It feels like something that I was enthusiastic and passionate about right from the beginning, actually. And I started by editing some real footage that was part of a project that Derek was making. It was a documentary with some a couple that played in a band, a heavy metal couple called Jucifer. And I was cutting this footage, beautiful footage that Derek shot on 16 millimeter. And I was actually able to play around with this sound perspective. And I started dreaming up this idea. And at one point, I said to Derek, I just need to write this thing. I just need to write this from the ground up. And he was like, man, this is my baby, but I'm going to let you adopt my baby. And it's yours. And so I started building it. And that was about 8 years ago that I actually started writing after the, it's hard to get a first film made, but it's also hard to get a first film made right. And when I say first film, I've made other film, but first fiction film, it's hard to get a first film made the way you want to make it. And that, well, like when I started Riz, I think you were like 4 years old, right?
Yeah.
So, I couldn't have cast Riz right away because he was just about to hit puberty.
I was underage.
And, you were underage. And so I knew, I had to wait for a little while. But that's actually an interesting kind of a meditation on process and creativity, because it has a path and it has a journey, and you just have to get on it. And I could never have seen where I'd end up, but man, I couldn't be more grateful, because finding an actor as brave as Riz is a really unusual thing. And that just needed to be a process.
And did you have a connection to the deaf community, or did you have to do a lot of research to kind of get into this world, or how did that happen?
There's a couple ways into that. Initially, the project did begin in the deaf community, and so it always was a part of the project. My grandmother went deaf when she was not old but not young. She was in her 60s, and she was a gay Jewish woman living in New York who was a cinephile, actually, and she went deaf, and she got caught in between the deaf and the hearing world. She wasn't part of the deaf culture, and she wasn't anymore able to interact with hearing culture. And she fought for the rest of her life to get films captioned, because she lost that avenue to cinema. So she was a really big part of the writing process for me and my brother, actually, because she was a bit of an orphan and a lost child, and so we kind of infused a lot of stuff from her into this process.
And Riz, I know a lot of times actors will sort of take on or try out a new skill or something in making a film. But if I'm not mistaken, you had to both learn how to be a drummer and how to sign. Is that correct?
Yeah, I spent 7 months trying to get as good as I could at both of those things. And it was daunting. It was certainly a big part of what attracted me to the role, as well as what terrified me about it. I remember when we first met, Darius and I, there was a lot that drew me to it. It was a beautifully written script. Darius's energy is, as just something very unique, and he just leads with such love and such an openness. It really kind of draws you in. Also, I don't know, I guess I could, on some level, just relate to Ruben as a character on some kind of fundamental level. But also then there's this kind of this hike, I guess you could say, of learning the drums and learning sign language. It just felt a little bit scary, and I figured maybe I should kind of step towards that because it was scary. And you know what? It wasn't easy, but it was also a beautiful experience, particularly just because they're both ways of communicating with your body. And you know, I make music, but I'm a rapper, and I often kind of play a lot with words, and I can be quite verbose as a person. And to kind of strip that away and to have to communicate, you know, through the drums, which is, you know, possibly like the most primal method of communication. And then also ASL, which is my sign instructor and friend Jeremy Stone, who's also in the film, said, you know, hearing people hide behind words. When you sign, you have to speak with your whole body. Mm-hmm. So both the experience of learning to drum and learning ASL, I think, just opened things up, you know, in ways that I hadn't expected. And it was a really enriching experience.
Putting aside those sort of technical challenges, when you mentioned the word scary, when I look at your character, it's as if his whole sense of self is stripped away. And what was that like, sort of emotionally, to lay yourself so bare and go from someone in the opening of the film who has a very, you know, set sense of himself, despite whatever addiction problems he's had, to just having everything stripped away from you?
Yeah, well, you know, I kind of feels like something that many people can relate to, particularly in the midst of this pandemic, actually. Because, you know, a lot of us define ourselves by our careers or how we interact with the outside world and the roles we play out there, where we're able to put on our masks and, you know, play these functions for other people. And in doing so, you know, find some self-worth. And with lockdown and with the way that, you know, things have unfolded in 2020, I think a lot of people have been forced to, or those of us who've been able to, those of us who've been privileged enough to be able to, you know, not have to go to work or been able to quarantine and shelter in place. I think, you know, a lot of people have had to sit with themselves. And it's when you have to sit with yourself and sit still and face that void and face who you might be underneath that mask and underneath all those roles that you play, it can be intense, you know, emotionally and psychologically. So I guess it was certainly one of those filming experiences that felt quite visceral and I think Darius created this tremendous atmosphere on set where it just felt like we were all going through this experience together. But I also think it's that kind of journey that Ruben experiences is one that, in a way, most of the world has been experiencing this year.
And Darius, can you talk a little bit about, while you're making this film, how much you were or weren't thinking about how it would play to the deaf community as well as community who's not deaf? Is that something that was on your mind a lot?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, the experience is really interesting because there's a lot of meta aspects to the experience that it's obviously a first person perspective from a hearing person's perspective. You know, the first word of the title is sound. So you're going from sound to not sound, but there's this kind of hyper awareness of that. You know, I realized early on that this film would be captioned and that there was some interesting choices with captions to make, and that perhaps what we could experience in a way that I haven't at least experienced it is that the hearing audience, because it's a first person perspective, becomes a minority in the film. And this actually wasn't elucidated fully until I was sitting in Toronto at the premiere watching it there was a lot of deaf people in the audience that night when we premiered. And what was fascinating about it is because the reason the ASL largely isn't subtitled is because it's a deeply committed first person perspective, which means that if Ruben, Riz's character, doesn't understand the ASL, either do we. So we are utterly immersed in this experience of being a minority. And that when we premiered it, you all of a sudden heard this large section of the audience laughing and understanding. And you really did feel this communal sense of, oh, right, I am the minority in this experience. I mean, I made the film and I was still the minority in that experience. And that was really a dream and a vision for the film, was that, you know, Riz as an actor had to go through that process very viscerally, where he lost his hearing literally in the movie and had hearing things that didn't allow him to hear his own voice. Riz had to go through that process, and only a hearing person could go through that, because you have to lose your hearing in order to be that minority. And then the audience goes through that when you watch it. So, and that's all around understanding that the deaf, what's so interesting to me, at least, is that two different cultures watch the same film and see two different films. You know, that's the same film, but you see it from your own cultural vantage. And I think that's really something that it's really interesting to me. And, you know, we get to visit deaf culture. You know, this film doesn't speak for deaf culture. This film is invited into deaf culture for a moment, and it invites a hearing audience to take a look at deaf culture, just as the deaf culture allowed us into their culture. And that's how it felt in the shoot. And that's how it was, you know, it was a privilege, you know.
Riz, you're an actor who I've been familiar with for a long time and long admired, but there was one actor in this film who I wasn't familiar with who blew me away, and that was Paul Raci. Can you talk a little bit about, who heads the group home? Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to work with him? I mean, he was a revelation for me when I saw
well, I'll
this
talk
film.
a little bit about working with him, and Darius can maybe speak to the process of casting him, and just what a unique needle in a haystack gift from God moment that was, because Paul's character, Joe, has a lot of similarities to Paul in terms of his life journey and life experience. But I'll just speak a little bit about kind of working with him. You know, Paul is someone who's had a very, very long career. He's worked, I think, not to speak for him, but I think he would say primarily in theater. And then, you know, as he described it, he'd kind of said that I was kind of ready to kind of turn my back on acting, because I was frequently just cast as kind of day players for 35 years. And I would come in for a day, you know, for 3 decades. And I think he never expected at this point in his life to kind of have the opportunity to bring so much of himself to a role. And when he did, you know, you just see those decades of experience, of wisdom, of sensitivity, of technical ability, just singing, you know, with the effortlessness that comes with maturity. And it's actually just was such a gift to me as an actor to be able to play opposite someone with that level of experience and yet humility at the same time, which is very rare to find together. And I also think it's a gift to us as audiences. You know, I'm so excited to see what Paul does next.
I mean, the scene when you show up after having had the cochlear implants to talk to him is just, I mean, it gives me chills just to think about it. Watching the two of you and watching his command is incredible. Darius, do you want to talk a little bit about casting Paul?
Oh, man.
Because it's a crucial character to the film.
Well, also that scene that you just mentioned, watching, you know, I was crying so deeply in every take that Riz and Paul did in real time. I could barely hold the monitor. Those guys, you know, if I ever have an experience as a director watching life occur in front of a camera again like that, I will be a lucky person, because it was, I mean, you remember that, Riz, it was just unbelievable to feel that kind of energy in a room. And it's hard to even understand what can possibly create that. I mean, you need to have an actor as committed and brave as Riz to go to that. You know, we shot chronologically. So the theory behind shooting chronologically is that you really understand and you earn these moments. And in this case, you know, we had this whole deaf community there in this house in the middle of the country, and which took a long time to even find that house, took years to find that house actually, and finding this house, and then everybody left and it was just Paul. So there was this sense of like time moving. And by the time we got to that scene, we knew that you're going to walk away from that scene and that was going to be over. You're leaving that community because it was chronological. And, you know, Paul is a 2-time Vietnam veteran. He's an unbelievably unique human being who he's CODA, and CODA means he's a child of deaf adults, which means his first language is ASL. And he was utterly enmeshed in deaf culture, obviously, because he grew up in it, and he didn't even speak English, you know. And he, you know, what's interesting about CODAs is that, you know, we talk a lot about hearing people, or we talk about deaf people, but very few people talk about CODAs. And so CODA's role is often to be an intermediary between the deaf and the hearing cultures. And as such, you become in service to. And you know, Paul, there's a lot of pain in that. There's a lot of pain in that, because where is the human? Where is the individual, you know? And Paul had been working, as Riz said, as an actor all this time. And then suddenly this role comes to him as if from the heavens. I mean, you can't possibly be more aligned with a role than he was with this role. And specifically because he was now this intermediary. And there was this healing process that was taking place. And, you know, I recently just looked at a video when I first drove Paul from, you know, to this location. I drove him before any actors got there. And he got there and he just burst into tears because he knew what it meant. It was like, this was a place where I get to hold these souls, these deaf souls. And in that scene with Riz, you know, to let go of that member of your flock, to let that member go was so painful for Paul, so deeply painful. And he told me stories of being on a boat, you know, and knowing who the weak link was when he was in the Navy in Vietnam, and knowing you had to not let this person sink the boat, you know, and that's what that scene's about. And this man, you know, very special to get that degree of specificity and to feel it and to feel it. And that came from both of these actors. And man, like I said, if I ever feel that again, I'll be blessed.
Well, we're running short on time, which is a shame because there's so much more I wanted to talk about, particularly the sound design and Nicholas Becker's work and how Riz was mic'd and so many other things about this film, which I found so fascinating. But we are out of time. Is there a quick thing or two you want to say about the sound design? I realize that's a hard thing to say quickly, but yeah.
It's tough. I mean, sound design kind of mirrored process. Riz went through a whole kind of auditory process in this. Sound design started 2 years before we even shot. And our sound mix was 23 weeks long. This was an absolutely exhaustive sound process. And what we were really after is to create something that people hadn't heard, but to not do it in a way that was about bells and whistles, but was about a deep process. And Nicolas Becker was a very big part of that. We did the sound at Carlos Regatas's place in Mexico. It was like a sound retreat. And it was just an unbelievable process. And the sound design of this film it's hundreds and hundreds of tracks. It's as big as any action film, but it doesn't act like that. And so to get to that kind of naturalistic place, Nicolas Becker, he came to set and he recorded Riz, and he recorded underwater, and he recorded in skulls, and he recorded Riz's his eyelids and his throat and his stomach, just to kind of really enmesh us in this process. It was unbelievable, and you know, I hope it feels that way, because it certainly was. It was really crazy.
Oh, it feels that way. And if there's any justice in the Oscar world, this year's sound mixing and sound editing Oscar won't go to a movie filled with explosions and gunshots and car screeches, but will go to something as intricate and sensitive.
For the sound team, I hope the same, because they are just fabulous.
The crafts in this film, top to bottom, were incredible.
Oh, well, thank you, David. Thank you so much, man.
thank you both for taking the time
Thank
out.
you.
I know, Riz, you're in production and you're really busy, and I really appreciate both of you guys.
Pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, I love the film. We're so excited to have it at the festival, and it's great to have you both here. So thank you very much for taking the time, and hope to see you guys back here in person soon.
Thanks so much. Can't wait.
Take care,
Thanks,
David.
Darius. Thanks,
Thanks.
See
Riz.
ya. Thank you.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.